Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story. The kitchen of the Grand Meridian Hotel was a symphony of controlled chaos. Sophie Laurent moved through it with practiced grace, her slender fingers adjusting the garnish on the final appetizer plate with the precision of a surgeon. At 32, Sophie had built a reputation as one of the city's most promising up-and-coming chefs, though few knew the steel beneath her gentle demeanor. Steel forged through years in foster care and fighting twice as hard as everyone else in the cutthroat culinary world. 5 minutes until service, she called out, her voice carrying authority despite its melodic quality. Her small catering team responded with focused efficiency. This gala, a charity auction for the city's elite, represented their biggest opportunity. Yet one successful night could launch Sophie's fledgling catering company from obscurity into the realm of serious contention. She smoothed down the front of her simple black dress, one she'd designed and sewn herself, with clean lines that flattered her curves while maintaining professional elegance. Unlike the waitstaff in their matching uniforms, Sophie would present each signature dish herself. She wanted to see the guests' reactions firsthand. "You've got this," she whispered to herself, a ritual before every event. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and the sparkle of diamonds adorning the city's wealthiest necks. Sophie pushed through the service doors with a tray of her signature appetizers, delicate pastry shells filled with spiced duck confit and topped with a tart cherry reduction. The contrast of flavors was her specialty, the unexpected combinations that lingered on the palate, something simple for the unsophisticated palate. A woman in a red designer gown arched a perfectly sculptured eyebrow, taking in Sophie's appearance before lifting one of the appetizers with manicured fingers. Sophie's smile remained professional. "Actually, the flavor profile is quite complex. The spice blend includes 15 different elements that build on each other with each bite," Sophie explained. The woman took a delicate nibble, her eyes widening slightly before she masked her reaction. "Interesting," she murmured, before turning away. Sophie continued through the crowd, presenting her creations and engaging briefly with guests who recognized quality regardless of the presenter's attire. She was describing the ingredients to an elderly gentleman when she felt it, a prickling awareness that raised the fine hairs on her neck. Someone was watching her. She turned slowly, her gaze drawn across the room as if pulled by an invisible thread. Near the large windows overlooking the city light stood a man who seemed somehow separate from the opulent crowd. Tall, with broad shoulders encased in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. He had skin the color of burnished gold and features that belonged on a classical statue, all sharp angles and perfect proportions. But it was his eyes that caught her, intense, intelligent, and fixed directly on her with an expression of unexpected interest. For one suspended moment, they stared at each other across the crowded room. Sophie felt heat rise to her cheeks, a physical reaction she couldn't control. The connection snapped when a waiter bumped into her, nearly upending her tray. "I'm so sorry, chef," the young server gasped. Sophie steadied the tray with practiced hands. "No harm done, Liam. Be a bit more careful, though. We can't afford to waste these," she said. When she looked back, the striking man was gone, swallowed by the crowd of glittering guests. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of service and presentation. Sophie's creations were met with appreciative murmurs, and several guests requested her business card, early signs of the night's success. As the main course wound down, she slipped away to check on dessert preparations. The hotel's service elevator was tucked discreetly in an alcove away from guest areas. Sophie pressed the call button, mentally reviewing the dessert presentation. The doors slid open to reveal the same man she'd locked eyes with earlier, now alone in the elevator. Up close, he was even more devastating. His cologne, subtle notes of sandalwood and something uniquely his own, wrapped around her as she hesitated at the threshold. "Going down?" His voice was deep, with a slight rasp that sent an unexpected shiver along her spine. "Yes," she managed, stepping into the elevator. "Kitchen level." He nodded, making no move to press any button since the kitchen was already selected. The doors closed with a soft hush, sealing them in the small space together. "Your appetizers were exceptional," he said after a moment. "The duck confit with cherry. It was like discovering a flavor I'd been searching for without realizing." Surprise flickered across Sophie's face. "You could taste all that from one bite?" A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I pay attention to things that matter." The way his eyes moved over her face made Sophie acutely aware of every inch of her skin. She was accustomed to being invisible to men like him, men whose watches probably cost more than her annual rent. "I'm Julian," he said, extending his hand. No last name, she noticed. Sophie Laurent. Her hand met his, and the contact sent a jolt of awareness straight to her core. His palm was warm, the grip firm but not overpowering. The elevator lurched suddenly, the lights flickering before plunging them into darkness. The abrupt stop knocked Sophie off balance, sending her directly against his chest. His arms came around her instinctively, steadying her. "Are you okay?" His voice came closer to her ear in the darkness. "Yes," she whispered, acutely aware of the solid wall of his chest against her palms, the strength in the arms that held her. She should step back, create distance, but her body refused to move. The emergency lights kicked on, casting the elevator in a dim amber glow that softened every edge and created shadows where there had been none. They stood there, neither pulling away, caught in a moment outside of time. "I should probably," Sophie began, but the words died as his gaze dropped to her lips. "Probably," he agreed, not releasing her. The air between them grew charged, heavy with unspoken possibility. Sophie had never experienced such an immediate, visceral reaction to anyone. Her heart hammered against her ribs, and she knew he must feel it where their bodies pressed together. "This is crazy," she whispered. "I don't know you, but you want to," he murmured, his certainty both arrogant and disarming because she couldn't deny the truth of it. When his head lowered toward hers, Sophie knew she should turn away. Instead, she tilted her face up in silent invitation. Their lips met in a kiss that started gentle, but quickly blazed into something urgent and consuming. One hand slid up her back, while the other cradled her neck as he deepened the kiss, tasting her with a thoroughness that made her knees weaken. Sophie's fingers curled into the lapels of his jacket, pulling him closer as the kiss obliterated every rational thought. There was only sensation, the heat of his mouth, the strength in the body pressed against hers, the intoxicating taste of him that hinted at depths she suddenly desperately wanted to explore. The elevator jerked back to life with a mechanical groan, breaking them apart just as the kiss threatened to consume them completely. They stared at each other in the dim light, both breathing hard, the air between them electric with stunned awareness. The doors slid open at the kitchen level, revealing a maintenance worker and hotel manager. "So sorry for the inconvenience, sir," the manager said, addressing Julian with deference that suggested he recognized him. "The backup generator kicked in, but we're checking all elevators personally." "No inconvenience," Julian replied, his voice remarkably steady despite the heat still evident in his eyes as they remained fixed on Sophie. "Quite the opposite." Security personnel appeared behind the manager. "Sir, Mr. Carter is asking for you, upstairs." Something like regret flashed across Julian's features. "I have to go," he said quietly to Sophie. "But this isn't over." Before she could respond, he was being ushered away, leaving Sophie standing in the elevator doorway, fingers pressed to lips that still burned from his kiss, wondering what hurricane she had just encountered and why she already craved its return. Chapter 2. Irresistible Pursuit. Sophie couldn't concentrate. 3 days had passed since the gala, and the memory of that elevator kiss still burned through her at unexpected moments. She'd catch herself touching her lips, remembering the taste of him. "Earth to Sophie." Emma waved a hand in front of her face. "That's the second time you've added salt instead of sugar." "Who is he?" "Who's who?" Sophie turned away, busying herself with order forms. "The man who's got you walking into walls for 3 days straight." Sophie sighed. "It's nothing. Just some guy at the Meridian Gala. We got stuck in an elevator. We kissed. And then he disappeared." "You kissed a stranger? In an elevator?" Emma's eyes widened. "You, the woman who made that investment banker fill out a questionnaire before agreeing to coffee?" The office door swung open, and Ava appeared, holding an enormous arrangement of orchids. "Delivery for you, chef," Ava announced. "And before you ask, yes, I checked for a card." Inside was a note with elegant handwriting. "The taste of you lingers longer than any flavor I've ever encountered. Dinner tonight. I'll be waiting at Lumen at 8. Julian?" Heat rushed to Sophie's face as Emma snatched the card. "The taste of you lingers," Emma read aloud. Elevator guy has game. I'm not going, Sophie insisted, though her body disagreed. Her phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. In case flowers aren't enough persuasion, one dinner. What are you afraid of? I'm not afraid, she muttered. Later that evening, standing outside Lumina in a deep purple dress, Sophie tried to quiet her doubts. She never did this. Meet strange men, no matter how handsome. Growing up in foster care had taught her caution. Building her business had required a focus that left little room for romance, yet here she was. The maitre d' led her through the dimly lit restaurant to a secluded corner booth. And there he was, standing as she approached, even more devastating in dark jeans and a charcoal cashmere sweater that emphasized his broad shoulders. His eyes, a warm amber that caught the candlelight, traveled slowly from her face down her body before returning to meet her gaze, sending heat pooling low in her belly. You came. His voice held pleased surprise. I was curious, she admitted, and slightly concerned about how you got my phone number. He smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. I asked the event coordinator for the contact information of the catering company for feedback purposes. That's borderline stalking, Sophie said, though she couldn't muster proper indignation. That's resourcefulness, he countered. Oh, I admit I wasn't sure you'd come. The sommelier appeared with wine that Julian must have pre-selected. Sophie watched as he tasted it with practiced confidence. Tell me something, she said after the sommelier departed. Why go to all this trouble for a woman you met once in an elevator? He considered her over the rim of his glass. Because in 40 years, I've never experienced anything like what happened in that elevator. His directness was disarming. Have you? Sophie took a sip of wine. No, she admitted. I haven't. Satisfaction flickered across his expression. Demurred to herself to explore it further. Dinner progressed through exquisite courses, the conversation flowing naturally. Julian asked thoughtful questions about her business, listened with genuine interest to her culinary philosophy. Sophie found herself sharing stories of her apprenticeship in Paris, the challenges of launching her business as a woman of color. You've overcome a lot, he observed admiringly. Takes a special kind of strength. Necessity, she corrected. When there's no safety net, failure isn't an option. Something flickered in his eyes, recognition perhaps. I understand that better than you might think. As they left the restaurant, the night air cool against her skin, Sophie knew she should call a cab, go home. Instead, she found herself accepting his suggestion of a walk along the nearby waterfront. When his hand brushed hers, the contact sent electricity racing up her arm. The third time it happened, his fingers interlaced with hers, warm and secure. I don't usually do this, she said quietly. What? Hold hands? Any of it. The elevator, this dinner, walking with a man I barely know at night. He stopped, turning to face her. Do you feel unsafe with me? That's the problem, she admitted. I feel too safe, too comfortable. It doesn't make sense. He stepped closer, his free hand coming up to trace her jaw. Some things defy explanation, Sophie. When he kissed her, it wasn't the desperate heat of their first encounter, but something deeper, more deliberate. He explored her mouth with thorough attention, as if memorizing her. Sophie's hand slid up his chest to curl around his neck, drawing him closer as the kiss deepened. She was breathless when they finally parted. His eyes had darkened with desire, his breathing unsteady as he pressed his forehead against hers. Come home with me, he said softly. The words, both question and plea, made every lesson in caution Sophie had ever learned scream at her to say no, but the chemistry between them had built throughout the evening into something almost unbearable. Yes, she whispered against his lips, feeling his smile before she saw it. His penthouse occupied the top floor of a sleek high-rise overlooking the park. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the glittering cityscape, but Sophie hardly noticed the multi-million-dollar view. Her attention remained fixed on Julian as he moved with casual confidence, opening wine. This doesn't match what you told me about yourself, she observed. Investment analysts don't usually live in penthouses like this. Something guarded flickered across his features. I've been fortunate in my investments, she turned in his arms. I'm not, though. Yours. Not like a possession. Poor choice of words, he acknowledged. I'm yours, more accurately, have been since that elevator. Their clothes created a trail to his bedroom. her dress pooling at her feet as he knelt to pay homage to each newly revealed inch of skin, his sweater tossed aside as her eager hands explored the sculpted muscles of his chest and shoulders. By the time they reached his bed, they were down to undergarments, their bodies feverish with need. Julian laid her gently on the cool sheets, his gaze traveling the length of her body with such raw appreciation that Sophie felt worshipped rather than exposed. "You are so beautiful," he whispered, voice rough with desire as he joined her on the bed. "I've thought of nothing else since that elevator." His hands and mouth explored her with dedicated attention, learning every curve, every sensitive spot that made her gasp or arch against him. When he finally covered her body with his own, Sophie was trembling with need. Their coming together was explosive, intense, beyond anything Sophie had experienced before. The physical connection awakened something deeper, more profound than mere pleasure. As they moved together, finding a rhythm that built toward release, Sophie found herself meeting his gaze, unable to look away from the raw emotion reflected there. Wonder, hunger, and something that frightened her with its intensity. Later, as moonlight spilled across the rumpled sheets, Sophie lay in the circle of Julian's arms, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Stay," he murmured into her hair, his voice rough with satisfied desire. "Stay until morning." The request was weighted with implication. Staying meant this wasn't just a one-night encounter, that whatever this thing between them was, it would continue. She should make an excuse, slip away, protect herself. Instead, she pressed a kiss to his chest, directly over his heart. "Okay," she whispered, feeling his arms tighten around her. But as dawn filtered through the windows, doubt crept in. What was she doing? This man, this world, none of it belonged in her carefully constructed life. She slipped from the bed while Julian slept, quickly gathering her scattered clothing. She paused at the bedside, taking in his sleeping form before scribbling a note on hotel stationery. "I don't do relationships. Last night was incredible, but let's leave it as a perfect memory." She placed it on her pillow and slipped out, closing the door quietly behind her, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest. What she didn't know was that Julian Hayes was already awake, watching through barely opened eyes as she fled, his jaw tightening with determination. He had found something he hadn't known he was searching for, and he had no intention of letting her disappear from his life. Not when he'd only just found her. Chapter 3. Surrender. Sophie was elbow-deep in preparation for a corporate lunch when Ava appeared in the kitchen doorway, her expression a mixture of amusement and curiosity. "Is a delivery for you?" "Again?" For 5 days straight, something had arrived at Sophie's office. First exotic flowers, then a rare culinary book she'd once mentioned during dinner, followed by a handwritten note detailing everything he'd enjoyed about their night together in language that made her blush to her roots. Today's delivery sat on her desk, a wooden crate filled with imported spices, each one rare and expensive. "That man is persistent," Emma observed, inspecting the saffron cinnamon sticks that cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. Sophie tried to maintain her resolve, even as her heartbeat quickened. "He'll give up eventually." Her phone chimed with a text she knew was from him before she even looked. "Do you think I've forgotten the taste of your skin? The sound you make when you come? I haven't. I won't. See you at 7. Heat flooded her body, pooling low in her belly. Before she could formulate a response, another text arrived with her home address, an address she definitely hadn't given him. "Your doorman's name is Miguel. He enjoys Cuban cigars and has a weakness for cronuts. In case you were wondering how I got your address." The audacity stole her breath. She typed furiously, "Stalking is illegal in all 50 states. His response came instantly. "Is it stalking when you want to see me as badly as I want to see you?" Sophie set the phone down as if it had burned her, because the most infuriating part was that he was right. For 5 days, she'd tried to forget the feel of his hands on her body, the intensity in his eyes as he moved inside her. For 5 nights, she'd woken gasping from dreams where he finished what he'd started in that elevator. When her doorbell rang at exactly 7:00 p.m., Sophie opened it with every intention of sending him away. Instead, she froze at the sight of him in dark jeans and a simple gray t-shirt that showcased the muscular arms she remembered wrapped around her. The casual attire made him look younger, more approachable, yet no less devastating. But it was what he carried that truly disarmed her. Grocery bags. "What is this?" she asked, not stepping aside to let him in. "Dinner." He held up the bags. "You mentioned that before becoming a chef you wanted to be a pastry specialist focused on chocolate, so I thought we'd make chocolate soufflés." The thoughtfulness of remembering that small detail from their conversation caught her off guard. "I never said you could come over." "You never said I couldn't." His confidence should have annoyed her. Instead, she found herself stepping back to let him in, telling herself it was only curiosity about what else he remembered. Her apartment was modest compared to his penthouse, a one-bedroom in a converted industrial building with exposed brick and large windows. Her kitchen, however, was a chef's dream, occupying nearly half the open space. Julian moved through it with surprising competence, unpacking ingredients of impeccable quality. "You cook?" Sophie couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice as she watched him locate her cutting board without having to ask. "I lived alone for many years before I could afford a personal chef." Something vulnerable flickered across his face so quickly she almost missed it. Some skills you don't forget. Working beside him in the kitchen created an unexpected intimacy. Their hands brushed as they passed utensils. Their bodies moved in unconscious synchronization. When he stood behind her to demonstrate his technique for tempering chocolate, his chest pressed against her back, his breath warm against her neck. "You're doing this on purpose?" she accused, her voice unsteady as his hands guided hers through the silky chocolate. "Cooking?" His lips brushed the sensitive shell of her ear as he spoke, sending shivers down her spine. "Or seducing you?" "Because yes to both." She turned in his arms, intending to create distance. Instead, she found herself captured by the naked desire in his eyes, a hunger that mirrored the ache building within her. "Why me?" The question had haunted her for days. "You could have any woman in the city." His expression turned serious. "I've had relationships based on mutual convenience, social status, even affection. But I've never felt what I felt in that elevator with you." His thumb traced her lower lip. "I've never wanted anyone the way I want you. Not just physically, though God knows that's unprecedented too, but all of you. Your fire, your frankness, your refusal to be impressed by the things that usually work." The raw honesty in his voice dismantled her defenses. When his lips met hers, Sophie surrendered to what she'd been fighting for days, her arms twining around his neck as the kiss deepened into something desperate and consuming. They never made it to the soufflés. Instead, they christened her kitchen counter, her dining table, and finally her bed in a night that left them both breathless and spent. Afterward, as they lay tangled in her sheets, Sophie traced the defined musculature of his abdomen, marveling at the contrast of their skin tones in the dim light. "Tell me something real," she murmured. "Something you don't tell everyone." He was quiet so long she thought he might have fallen asleep. When he finally spoke, his voice held none of its usual confidence. "I grew up poor," he said quietly. "Not just struggling middle class, but the kind of poverty where you wear the same clothes until they fall apart, where dinner is whatever's cheapest at the corner store." His fingers played absently with one of her curls. "My mother worked 3 jobs after my father left. She died when I was 18. Sophie propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face. "What happened then?" "Foster care." The words hung between them. "Until I aged out at 20. The revelation stunned her. "You were in the system?" "4 homes in 2 years. His jaw tightened, none of them particularly pleasant. Understanding dawned. "That's why you sensed it in me." He nodded. "Survivors recognize each other." Sophie laid her palm over his heart, feeling its steady beat. "What did you mean at dinner, about being in investments after aging out?" "I worked construction during the day, took night classes, got a scholarship." His voice held no self-pity, just a matter-of-fact recounting. "Got into finance, made some lucky calls, worked harder than anyone else." He didn't mention the billions, the corporate takeovers, the ruthless reputation that had earned him the nickname the Executioner in business circles. In that moment, lying in Sophie's bed, he was simply Julian, the boy who had survived, the man who had built himself from nothing. "I've accomplished everything I set out to do," he continued, his voice softening as his fingers traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "Built the empire, secured the fortune, proved everyone wrong?" A hollow note entered his voice. "And none of it means anything. None of it fills the emptiness." The confession held such vulnerability that Sophie felt her own walls crumbling. "I understand that," she whispered. The emptiness. He gently tilted her face up to his. "Not with you," he said softly. "For the first time in my life, I don't feel it when I'm with you." The words terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Before she could respond, his mouth found hers again, the kiss deep and searching, as if he could imprint himself on her soul. This time, when they came together, it wasn't with the urgent desire of their previous encounters, but with a tenderness that brought tears to Sophie's eyes. Dawn found them still entwined, neither willing to break the connection that had formed between them. As sunlight filtered through her blinds, Sophie knew she had crossed a line from which there was no return. Whatever this was between them, it had ceased to be casual the moment she let him into her home, into the carefully guarded sanctuary of her life. "I have a meeting I can't miss," he murmured regretfully, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "But I want to see you tonight." Later, after he had gone, Sophie stood in her kitchen, surrounded by the ingredients for soufflés they never made, her body pleasantly sore from a night of lovemaking that had transcended the physical. She knew she should be panicking, erecting the barriers that had protected her for so long. Instead, she found herself smiling as she reached for her phone to text him back. "Tonight, my place. We'll actually cook this time." His response made her laugh out loud. No promises. Over the next weeks, they fell into a rhythm that felt both exciting and comfortable. Nights spent exploring each other's bodies and minds, mornings sharing coffee before reluctantly parting for work. Julian never stayed at his penthouse anymore, seemingly content in her modest apartment, his expensive suits now sharing space with her chef whites in her closet. Sophie found herself opening up about her own past, the series of foster homes, the high school teacher who recognized her talent and helped her apply for culinary school, the years of working double shifts to save for her business. He listened with an intensity that made her feel truly seen, offering neither pity nor platitudes, just understanding. What he didn't offer was his last name, his business card, or any concrete details about his company. Whenever she probed about his work, he deflected with vague comments about investments and acquisitions. Sophie told herself it didn't matter, that what they shared transcended job titles and bank accounts, until the night she accepted the catering job that would change everything. Chapter 4. Betrayal. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, an urgent request to replace a caterer who had backed out of a high-profile charity gala at the last minute. The client was offering triple Sophie's usual rate, with a promise of exposure to the city's elite. It was the kind of opportunity that could elevate her small company to the next level. "You have to take it," Emma insisted, eyes wide at the mentioned figure. "This could be our break." Sophie studied the contract. "Hayes Enterprises annual charity auction for children's education," she read aloud. "Why does that name sound familiar?" "Because they're only one of the largest investment firms in the country," Emma said, scrolling through her phone. "Their CEO is some reclusive billionaire genius, hardly ever gives interviews or appears in public." Sophie shrugged. The name tickled something in her memory, but she couldn't place it. "Confirm it," she told Emma. "We'll need to work around the clock, but we can pull it off." She texted Julian that night. "Rain check on dinner tomorrow. Emergency catering job came up." His response was unusually curt. "No problem. Good luck." For 2 days, Sophie threw herself into preparations, barely sleeping as she perfected the menu for what would be her company's most prestigious event to date. When Julian called, she let it go to voicemail, too consumed with work to talk. It was the first time they'd gone more than a day without seeing each other since their relationship began. The night of the gala, Sophie arrived early to the gleaming downtown skyscraper that housed Hayes Enterprises. The event was being held in the company's private reception hall, a stunning space with soaring ceilings and views that made even Sophie, a native New Yorker, pause in appreciation. "You must be the chef," a polished woman with a clipboard approached. "I'm Clara, the event coordinator. The kitchen is this way." As they walked, Clara efficiently briefed her on the evening schedule. "Mr. Hayes is very particular about his events. Everything must be perfect." "It will be," Sophie assured her, though privately she wondered what kind of man inspired such nervousness in his staff. The kitchen was a wonderland of state-of-the-art equipment. Sophie's team worked with practiced efficiency, preparing for service while she supervised every detail. She had chosen to wear one of her own designs for the event, a simple black dress with subtle structural elements. that flattered her curves while remaining professional. A twisted rope of pearls, her mother's. The only thing she had left of her, adorned her neck. With 30 minutes until service, Sophie slipped out to survey the reception hall, now filled with guests in formal wear that probably cost more than her monthly rent. She was studying the flow of the room when she heard them. A cluster of women near the bar, their voices carrying just enough for her to hear. "Is that the caterer?" One of them, a blonde in a designer red gown, stared openly at Sophie. "What is she wearing?" "Some off-the-rack thing, I suppose," another replied with a dismissive wave. "You can't expect everyone to have taste." "Or money," added a third, triggering tittering laughter. Sophie felt the familiar burn of humiliation and anger. She had faced this her entire life. Judgment based on appearance, assumptions about her worth tied to the price tag of her clothing. Usually she let it roll off her, but tonight, with the pressure of the event and her exhaustion, the words stung more than they should. She retreated to a service corridor, needing a moment to compose herself before facing her team. Leaning against the wall, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice announced over the PA system, "please welcome our host for the evening, the CEO of Hayes Enterprises, Mr. Julian Hayes." Sophie's eyes flew open. Something about the name. Applause erupted as a figure took the stage, and Sophie's world tilted on its axis. There, dressed in an impeccable tuxedo, stood Julian. Her Julian, smiling confidently at the crowd. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he was saying, his familiar voice now carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to command. "Hayes Enterprises is proud to host our annual charity auction for children's education." Sophie couldn't breathe. Julian wasn't just some investment analyst. He was Julian Hayes, the reclusive billionaire CEO of a global empire, the man who had been lying to her for weeks. As if sensing her presence, his gaze swept the room and locked with hers. For a split second, shock registered on his face before he recovered, continuing his speech without missing a beat. But Sophie had seen it, the flash of panic, the realization that his careful deception had unraveled. She backed away, retreating to the kitchen on unsteady legs. Her team looked up expectantly, waiting for direction, unaware that their chef's world had just imploded. "Begin service," she managed, her professional training taking over despite the chaos in her mind. For the next hour, she moved through her duties in a daze, avoiding the main hall where she might see him again. It didn't work. "Chef Laurent," his voice, low and urgent, came from behind her as she inspected a tray of desserts. "Sophie, please let me explain." She turned slowly, taking in the sight of him in his perfect tuxedo, every inch the billionaire CEO. How had she not seen it? The penthouse, the casual mentions of investments, the way doors opened for him everywhere they went. "Explain what?" Her voice was eerily calm. "That you've been lying to me since the moment we met? That you created this entire fiction about who you are?" "Not a fiction," he protested, stepping closer. "Everything I told you about my past, about my feelings, it's all true, except the part where you're Julian Hayes, billionaire CEO, not Julian the investment analyst." Sophie's laugh held no humor. "A minor detail." His jaw tightened. "Would you have given me a chance if you'd known who I was from the start? Or would you have assumed I was like every other rich bastard who sees women as acquisitions?" The accusation hit uncomfortably close to the truth. Sophie had long ago learned to avoid men with money and power. They inevitably saw her as a novelty, an exotic adventure, before returning to women from their own world. "That wasn't your decision to make," she said finally. "You took away my choice. I wanted you to know me," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The real me, not the persona, not the bank account. For once in my life, I wanted someone to want me for myself." Before she could respond, the kitchen door opened and Clara appeared. "Mr. Hayes, the auction is about to begin." "They're waiting for you." He didn't move, his eyes still locked on Sophie's. "I'll be right there." When they were alone again, Sophie shook her head. "You need to go. You have a gala to host, and I have a job to finish. Sophie, please, go." The word came out sharper than she intended. Something shifted in his expression, a harden, a retreat behind walls she hadn't seen since their first meeting. With a curt nod, he turned and left. Sophie made it through the rest of the evening on autopilot, directing her team with mechanical precision, avoiding the main hall where he continued to play host. As the event wound down and guests began to depart, she oversaw the cleanup, determined to leave before having to face him again. She had just signed off on the final arrangements when a security guard approached. "Miss Laurent, Mr. Hayes requests your presence in his office." "Tell Mr. Hayes I finished my contracted duties," she replied coldly. The guard looked uncomfortable. He was very insistent. Part of her wanted to refuse, to walk out and never look back. But another part, the part that had woken in his arms, that had shared whispered confidences in the dark, needed closure. Fine. The elevator required a keycard to access the executive floor. As they ascended, Sophie's reflection in the polished doors showed a woman she barely recognized, composed on the surface but with eyes that revealed the storm within. Julian's office occupied the corner of the top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the city he effectively owned. He stood with his back to the door, jacket removed, shoulders tense beneath his white shirt. "You can go," he told the guard without turning around. When the door closed, leaving them alone, the silence stretched between them like a living thing. "Your team did an excellent job tonight," he said finally, still facing the window. "I've authorized a bonus for all of them." "I don't want your money." He turned then, and the raw emotion on his face nearly undid her resolve. "What do you want, Sophie?" "The truth, all of it, no more convenient omissions." He gestured to a seating area, but she remained standing, unwilling to prolong this any more than necessary. With a sigh, he leaned against his desk. "My name is Julian Hayes. I'm the CEO and majority owner of Hayes Enterprises." The words came out flat, rehearsed. "Everything else I told you was true. My mother died when I was 18. I was in foster care. I worked construction and took night classes. And then I got a break with a small investment firm, worked my way up, made some key investments that paid off, started my own company, built it into what it is today." His jaw tightened. "But none of that matters because all anyone sees is the money, the power. No one sees me." "I saw you," Sophie whispered, hating the tears that threatened. "And you repaid me with lies. I never meant for it to go this far." He pushed away from the desk, closing the distance between them. "That first night in the elevator, I was just Julian, not the CEO, not the billionaire, just a man captivated by an extraordinary woman." His voice softened. "And then, I couldn't figure out how to tell you without losing you. So instead, you let me find out like this." She gestured around the opulent office. "Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? To realize everyone in that room probably knew who you were except me?" "I was going to tell you," he insisted. "Tonight, actually. That's why I was distant when you said you were working. I knew which event you were catering." Sophie laughed bitterly. "How convenient that you found your courage just as I was about to discover the truth anyway." His expression hardened. "You're right. I was a coward. I should have told you from the start." He ran a hand through his hair, disheveling the perfect CEO image. "But can you honestly say you would have given me a chance if you'd known?" The question hung between them, uncomfortably accurate. "That's not the point," she said finally. "The point is, you took away my choice. You made me fall for a lie." "A lie," he said fiercely, stepping closer. "I am the same man who held you through the night. The same man who told you things I've never told another soul." His voice dropped. "The same man who has been falling in love with you since the moment you looked at me in that elevator." The word sent a shock through her system. Neither of them had used that word before. Love. "Don't," she whispered, backing away. "Don't say things you don't mean." In 2 strides he was before her, his hands grasping her upper arms. "I have never meant anything more in my life. I love you, Sophie. Not because you're beautiful, though God knows you are. Not because you're talented or strong or any of the million things that make you extraordinary. I love you because when I'm with you, I'm not Julian Hayes, billionaire CEO. I'm just a man who's finally found where he belongs." The raw emotion in his voice shook her resolve. When his mouth descended on hers, she should have pulled away. Instead, she found herself responding with all the confusion and hurt and desire that warred within her. The kiss deepened into something desperate and consuming, his hands tangling in her hair as hers clutched at his shirt. With a groan, he lifted her, setting her on the edge of his desk, papers scattering to the floor as he moved between her legs. Sophie knew she should stop this, that sex would only complicate an already impossible situation. But as his lips traced the sensitive skin of her neck, his hands sliding beneath her dress, rational thought fled. Their lovemaking was different this time, fierce, almost angry. Each touch a statement, each kiss a question neither could answer. When release finally came, it left Sophie trembling in his arms, tears she couldn't suppress sliding down her cheek. Julian held her close, his breath ragged against her hair. "Stay," he whispered. "Stay with me. Let me show you who I really am, all of me this time." The plea broke through the last of her defenses. Gently she pushed him back, straightening her dress with trembling hands. "I can't," she said softly. "I need time, space." Pain flashed across his face, quickly masked behind the practiced control of a man accustomed to hiding vulnerability. "How much time?" "I don't know." She slid off the desk, gathering her dignity around her like armor. "I don't know if there's any coming back from this." He nodded once, jaw tight. "I understand." She nearly broke at the resignation in his voice, the way he stepped back to let her pass. At the door she paused, unable to leave without one last look at the man who had simultaneously awakened and shattered her heart. "You know what the worst part is?" she said quietly, voice thick with emotion. "I would have fallen for you anyway, the real you, if you had just given me the chance." Before he could respond, she slipped out, closing the door firmly behind her. It wasn't until she was in the taxi heading home that she allowed herself to break down, sobs racking her body as the city lights blurred through her tears. In his office, Julian Hayes stood motionless, staring at the door through which Sophie had disappeared. Then, with a roar of frustration, he swept everything from his desk, watching as pens and papers and awards clattered to the floor. He had finally found the one thing his billions couldn't buy, and lost it because of his own fear. Chapter 5. Fighting Fate. For a week, Sophie managed to avoid all contact with Julian. She blocked his number, returned the extravagant flower arrangements that appeared at her door, and instructed her doorman to refuse his entry. The payment for the Hayes Gala arrived, triple the agreed amount, which she promptly donated to a foster youth culinary program, refusing to profit from what felt like emotional deception. "You're punishing yourself more than him," Emma observed, watching Sophie mechanically prep ingredients. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, evidence of sleepless nights spent replaying every moment with Julian. "I'm not punishing anyone," Sophie insisted, the knife in her hand moving with perhaps more force than necessary. "I'm moving on." But moving on proved impossible when her phone rang with a call from Mercy Hospital. Her foster sister Lena had been rushed to the emergency room with acute appendicitis. "We need to operate immediately," the doctor explained when Sophie arrived. Only later, as Lena slept in recovery, did the financial reality hit. Lena had no insurance. Her job at the daycare center didn't provide benefits. The hospital administrator's expression was sympathetic but firm as she outlined the costs. Sophie thought of her business account, already stretched thin. It wasn't enough. Back at her office, she scrolled through pending job offers, looking for anything that might generate quick cash. One name stood out: Lorenzo Bianchi, owner of Club Noir, a high-end establishment with rumored mob connections. "Mr. Bianchi, this is Sophie Laurent. I understand you're still looking for a caterer for your anniversary event." His voice oozed satisfaction. "Indeed, Ms. Laurent, though my offer expires tonight." "Ooh, I'll take it." The fee was substantial, enough to cover a significant portion of Lena's medical bills.